I'm Bob Brill. He's Eric Kramer. Welcome to Kramer and Brill Fantasy Football Podcast, now videocast as well. Now you can hear the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Libsyn, radio.com, and wherever you get your podcasts. And now you can also see the videocast on YouTube by going to my Bob Brill YouTube channel or by finding the links for all of this at kramerandbrill.com. That's the easiest way. For most leagues, this is the final game before the fantasy football playoffs. So this is an important week. So we decided to bring in some extra firepower here. We have a special guest joining us this edition of Kramer and Brill, and he is the former Los Angeles Rams quarterback, Vince Ferragamo. Vince, welcome to the show.
Hi, Bob. Good to be on the show with you guys.
Hey, you know, I find it interesting that your career ended basically coinciding with Eric's career starting. Your last season was 1986. Eric's rookie season was 1987. So you never played each other, but you sort of almost crossed paths.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities, I think, Bob. It's just the fact that I was leaving the game, Eric was coming on, and he was a much better quarterback than myself. But so, you know, it was kind of cool because I played a year in Canada. Eric was up in Canada, and he came back to the NFL and, you know, was very sharp and did a great job. And I remember watching him play actually after he retired. So it was kind of enjoyable to see somebody who kind of followed my path was there playing quarterback as well.
Well, and I guess I grew up watching Vince, and that year they went to the Super Bowl. Obviously, it was right here in Pasadena, and so I, you know, grew up watching that. And yeah, I mean, then I found out just reading up on Vince today, he went to Banning High School. I had no idea about that. That was like a powerhouse back then, man. So yeah, it was, and had no idea you grew up locally too. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, we both grew up, Bob, in the same area. You know, I think you went to Pierce Junior College too for 1 year Eric, and then before you went to North Carolina State. But yeah, he's just kind of, you know, being a Southern California kid, you know, it's like kind of the breeding grounds for a lot of quarterbacks here in Southern California. So John Elway is another name that comes to mind, you know, that they grew up here locally. So
yeah, he was in our league. I went to Somar High. I didn't play football, I played baseball, but and Elway went to Granada right after that. And I mean, I know that heart of the San Fernando Valley, like you said, it was just a breeding ground. We had, so many players that came out of there and so many guys that just went on to good college careers, but never went into the pros. But we had a good amount of pros too. It's like, I know when we moved out here from Pittsburgh back in the early mid 60s, the cool thing was you could play baseball year round, you know, and I remember going down to San Fernando Park one year, and the old LA Rams used to work out there in the preseason. And I remember seeing Bill Munson, throwing the ball around, and it was just, we'd go down there and just watch. And we played Babe Ruth baseball on the field where they were working out, which was so cool, you know.
Yeah, you could go outside and shoot a basketball too in the middle of winter out here.
That's true.
You didn't have to play inside, right? Right.
So I know Eric didn't know much about fantasy football back then, but he told me that he found out about fantasy football when a fan approached him because he had him on his team, right, Eric?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I was, this was like 1995, I think. And the year before, I had gotten hurt, and Steve Walsh came in and played well, finished that year. And then they opened up the quarterback battle between the two of us to start training camp. So really nobody knew who was going to be playing quarterback for the Bears. And so ultimately I started that season, and we would start out the season, you know, kind of finish the season the same way, offensively, doing pretty well. And so at some point during the season, a guy shouts to me as I'm kind of just playing that catch, warming up for a game. And he's talking about how well that he and I are killing it this year. And I'm like, killing it in what? And he's like, fantasy football. He goes, you're my quarterback. So that was my introduction to fantasy football. And now all these years later, here Bob and I are doing a fantasy football podcast.
So Vince, what was your earliest recollection of fantasy football?
Well, I think, that was what, 1991 or something about that time, huh, Eric?
Well, for me,
what year was that fantasy football?
I don't know.
95. Okay, that's after the Detroit Lions. After you went.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So Bob would know when all this began, but that was my introduction to even hearing about it, was 1995.
Yeah, I was playing fantasy football in 1967.
I was 3 then.
Well, my first recollection of fantasy football, I think, Bob takes me to, when in 2017, the rookie quarterback who was drafted.
Uh-huh.
I put him on my fantasy football team. I never played before. So I said, well, I'm going to take this guy by the name of Deshaun Watson.
Oh, golly.
And he didn't, and nobody wanted him. Nobody wanted him. Maybe he was right on the list. And I go, man, this kid was good at Clemson. I'm going to take him. He's going to be good in the NFL. So, he ends up starting like the third or fourth game, Eric, and he went berserk. Numbers were going crashing the board.
Right.
Yeah, and then you guess who my quarterback was the next year?
Well, let's see.
Let me give you a hint.
Was he a Ram?
2018. No, he was in his second year. Who?
It was Mahomes.
Yeah.
I hope.
Oh my gosh.
Perfect.
Yeah. No. Nobody wanted him either. He was an unknown, right? Coming after Alex Smith. So I go, no.
Who was putting this draft together? The Chicago Bears? They didn't want him either.
I don't know.
Either one of them.
The Fox people. That's how smart the Fox people are.
Well,
it was just fun.
I had the same thing with Watson because I picked him up like in the 5th round. And, as Eric will tell you, I'm from Pittsburgh and I'm a major Steeler fan, as you can see by the background here.
Yeah.
And, Ben's been my quarterback since day one, and he's been a machine for me. And I have to tell you that this past week, because of the way this week has been going with the Ravens and COVID and everything, I played a game. I ended up losing. But for the first time in the history of Bob Brill's fantasy football, I did not have a Steeler in my lineup.
Oh. Well, they didn't play a game.
Oh,
did they?
Well, I had to move them. I had to put in other guys because we didn't know if they were going to play the Ravens.
Right.
And they kept postponing the game.
That was smart.
Okay, what if they don't play? So I put in Deshaun Watson, who was my backup quarterback, and he scored 50 points for me. So I was okay, but I still lost.
Yeah, he can do it.
Well,
Hey, who's that behind you? Is that Jack Ham behind you?
That's Jack Ham. Yeah, he was my favorite Steeler of all time.
Man, I tell you, Eric, when we played in the Super Bowl game in 1980, that Pittsburgh Steeler team was 13 Hall of Famers on that team.
Yeah, they were.
I don't think I've ever seen in any era a better team than that.
Probably not, right?
Offense, defense, special teams.
Yeah, they captured a lot of fans from around the country for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man, they were good.
Yeah, you guys led at halftime 13-10. And I remember I was watching that game, and they interviewed Jack Lambert as he's walking off. And he said something about it ain't over yet or something like that. And then, of course, the second half they came back and was it 31-19, I think, or something was the final.
Yeah, I think Chuck Noll chased the cameraman too off the field. He didn't want him. He didn't want him in his face. So, yeah, they were a little disappointed. But I just the cream rises to the top always, Bob. Especially in big games, experience factor is such a big thing. I mean, we had a lot of young players, but we had a great defense and great coaching staff. But just no match for the Pittsburgh Steelers. They were just that good.
Well, we're going to put you on the spot today because in a few minutes, we're going to bring in a fan onto the show to ask the quarterback. And first time, we're going to get the chance to ask 2 quarterbacks. Each week, we select a fan who writes in to ask Eric a fantasy football-related question, and we bring that fan onto the video cast to ask the question directly. And you could be that fan by simply emailing us at brillpro@gmail.com. That's brillpro@gmail.com. You can see it right there at the bottom of your screen. And right now, we're going to take a look at how we did for you. So how did we do for you? Well, we said Mahomes and Watson were high on our list, with Mahomes pumping out 462 and 3 scores. Watson added 4 scores on 318. Cousins was solid as well with 3 TD passes. And between them, they did not throw a pick. We did miss the boat on Derek Carr, who failed miserably. On the running back side, we love Derrick Henry. So what's not to love? 27 carries, 178 and 3 TDs. We again liked Antonio Gibson, 115 and 3 touches, along with James Robinson's 128 and a touch. And you really liked Nick Chubb, and it showed, 144 and a score. I liked Wayne Gallman, 94 yards and a score, was worth it. On the receiver side, who saw Tyreek Hill getting 13 catches for 269 and 3 scores, with most of it coming in the first quarter? He killed me, cost me my game. You loved A.J. Brown, his 98 and a score. I really liked Will Fuller, his 171 and 2 scores. We did not see Landry coming back with 143. Eric, you did like Deebo Samuel. He had 11 for 133, and we both like Gronk with his 6 for 106. Now, trending up this week, we have Austin Eckler, Wayne Gallman, James Robinson, Tyreek Hill, Colin Johnson, and Evan Ingram. Trending down this week, Daniel Jones, Alex Smith, Cam Newton, Derek Carr, and the Denver Broncos, the whole team. So with the fantasy playoffs on the line, this being the traditional last week of the fantasy season and teams need this game to make the playoffs, I want to point out that both the Buccaneers and Panthers are on byes this week. They're unusual this late in the season. So you want to replace the following guys: Bridgewater, Robbie Anderson, Curtis Samuel, Mike Davis, DJ Moore, and the Panthers defense for sure. For Tampa, you want to replace Brady, Mike Evans, Godwin, Ronald Jones, and Gronkowski. The Bucs defense, Leonard Fournette, and Antonio Brown. Now, if you're a dynasty league, you're in one of those, you're just going to want to bench them. But standard leagues, it's either bench or replace. So, Eric, your thoughts on this week?
Well, in reference to my Lions firing Quinn and Patricia, I did wear the T-shirt today. But the fact that they fired him, I think the team's a little obviously in flux now, but TJ Hawkinson is still coming through. Even though he didn't get in the end zone, he was their leading receiver. And then the Broncos, obviously, they're not going to win many games or fantasy points playing a practice squad receiver, Kendall Hinton, at quarterback anymore. So until they get that situation figured out, I would stay away from all the Bronco players like you had mentioned earlier. And Alex Smith, again, continues to be a great story for me. Even though he didn't put up great numbers this past week, the Washington football team destroyed Dallas. And, not only Gibson, I think, but McLaurin as well. Still their leading receiver with nearly 100 yards. And then Dallas, even though they got destroyed, Amari Cooper still had a great day with 112 yards and a touchdown. Derrick Henry, what can you say about him? So far in the season, he's rushed for over 1,200 yards and 12 touchdowns. And with the Titans at 8-3, right now, every week he's showing up. And so is he even a potential MVP candidate? Because all we talked about so far is quarterbacks, but I think he should be in that conversation as well. And then you mentioned Eckler, who's trending up. And don't forget about Justin Herbert, the quarterback, again, even though he's a rookie, went over 300 yards and had a touchdown and is still looking great. And Taysom Hill, even though we thought he would have a great game, numbers-wise as a quarterback, he didn't. But they still find ways to get him in the end zone, and he's still a big part of the running game and scored 2 touchdowns that way. And then you've got the 49ers over the Rams, which was I don't get that, but it happened. And then the Trubisky Rodgers discrepancy in their game was obvious, I think, to everybody. But the Bears defense gave up 41 points easily. I don't get that to the Packers. And so I was
Aaron
shocked.
Rodgers.
Yeah, well, there. I mean, that's a guy that's got an answer, it seems, for every defense, including the Bears. And then the Raiders, how they rolled over just against the Falcons didn't make any sense. And so I've got doubts about them rebounding actually against the Jets this week.
Vince, your thoughts on this week?
Wow, you guys are throwing out stats and numbers. That's unbelievable. Wow, you guys have it all covered. All I can look at is Russell Wilson, with Seattle, and DK Metcalf, and also Tyler Lockett. I mean, those guys, they produce numbers each and every week. I think he's on pace to break the all-time season touchdown record. I don't know. It might be tough to beat Peyton Manning and Patrick Mahomes, but I kind of like that team a little bit as far as numbers. I really like the rookie receiver for the Vikings. I mean, Jefferson, he's a standout. He's been on the list a couple times. He's really playing good, Eric. I mean, he'd be a nice target to throw to. And as well as I, having that great receiver out there that's dependable and will run great routes for you. I know that in the Rams situation, Robert Woods has been great. He's put up big numbers over the time. Cooper Kupp has been right there on top of the list. But I have to agree with you. And Justin Herbert is having big games with the Chargers. I think he puts up big numbers each and every week, over 300 yards passing. Keenan Allen is a great hunter, and Henry is another good player. So I wouldn't count those guys out if you have them on your league, because they could put up big numbers, each and every week. So, I mean, those are my kind of thoughts just over there. And then New Orleans, I think they probably have the best receiver in football right now, in Michael Thomas. He's coming back. He's healthy now. And, I mean, if he's on your league, he could put up numbers like crazy. So,
Vince, I know you follow the Rams a lot. And Eric mentioned it, the fact that, just kind of don't figure how the Niners have beaten the Rams 4 games in a row, and the Rams, they got this great defense, and their offense is flying high. What's going on there? I mean, I asked Eric this last week. Does that get into your head, a quarterback's head? Does that get into a team's head? You're playing a team that is so banged up. I mean, they got so many injuries. It's like they could barely field a team, but they come in and they beat you for the 4th time in a row.
Well, from a quarterback perspective, I think Eric would agree. I mean, you look at a guy like Carson Wentz. Let's just take that for an example in Philadelphia. I mean, he doesn't know which side's up anymore. I mean, you're getting hit so many times back there. Sometimes you start to begin to question your ability as a quarterback. Maybe it's not made for me to play this game. And you question your confidence level drops. And so this kid's a great young quarterback. He just needs to be supported by an offensive line, some people around him. He's got Doug Peterson calling the plays, just like Kyle Shanahan does in San Francisco. I mean, these are bright coaches, but I think Kyle Shanahan, when you mentioned the Rams 49er contest, it's always going to be a rock fest. I mean, it's a slug them out, knock them down, drag out fight. And, 49ers always come in and they battle hard against the Rams. They knock them around. And, years ago when I played for the Rams, we always had great offensive line and great defense. And we never wanted that to happen to us. We always delivered a knockout punch to our opponent. But it just doesn't seem like today the Rams are built more for disguise, deception, trickery, quick counts, those kind of things, and finesse. And they're not built on power and strength and slugfest. So I think that's how they're getting to him. They're getting to him with the defensive line. They're beating them up front. They can't run the football, and they can run the ball against the Rams. It's a mindset.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Vince. And that Greg Jennings, who was commentating on the game, mentioned that in talking to Kyle Shanahan earlier that week, he's like, I hope we've run the ball 30, 40 times. Then he called him back and said, no, make that 70. And that's what they come into the game wanting to do, and they do it. I mean, and it was happening anytime they wanted to run the ball for 5-8 yards, it happened. And they have a way of pounding the edge of the defense, and they're getting outside no matter what. And then they do
that, Eric. And I think as you know, Eric, coaching is plays such a big role in the success of an offense. And Kyle Shanahan's worked with his dad, Mike Shanahan, and they've got together and in off seasons have gone over play after play after play, running plays. It's like when I meet with my family and I talk to my brother Chris, who's been coaching high school football for 50 years. It's like you bring out the playbook. I mean, do we have to talk football again? It's just like drawn up plays every time we meet. And so I can just imagine what the two of those guys were going through. And that's the reason why they bring the fullback in. It's old school football. They bring them in. They do a lead play with the fullback up there. They run counter. They run gap. They run sweep. But they knock you around, and they're pulling tackles. They're pulling guards, and they do it all. So it's a menagerie of plays up front that the defense has to worry about, and you can just hand the ball off and do some play action passing and really attack defenses.
Great stuff, guys. Now we come to our regular feature, Ask the Quarterback, and today we welcome in Shane Zazula. Shane is from Southern California, and he is a teacher. He's a longtime fantasy baseball and football player. Shane, welcome to the show, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, gents. Nice to see y'all. Hope you're all doing well and you're happy and healthy. My name's Shane Zazula. I'm a history teacher in the LA area. Huge sports fan, huge fantasy football, huge Dodger fan in my classroom, as you can see. And pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, yeah, you get a special treat. You get to ask two quarterbacks your questions. So let's start off. What would you like to ask Eric and Vince?
Awesome. Eric and Vince, nice to see you both. Hope you're both doing well. My first question is, I want to know what you think happened to Lamar Jackson. He went from an MVP season to a huge slide. So did the defenses figure him out, or what's going on with that?
I would say no. No one's figured him out. It's just that I think despite, they made references last year to how much he'd improved with his within the pocket ability to play the game, his anticipation, his accuracy. And I would say that's to a degree true, but yet even though he made improvements, he was far from where guys like Aaron Rodgers were and have been and continue to be, Ben Roethlisberger, Watson, Mahomes, all these guys. that's the way to play the game consistently from inside the pocket. And that's to be a consistent quarterback. That's what you got to do. So he's, in my opinion, not there yet. He wasn't there last year, and he's not there this year. I think part of the reason he had such great success last year was their defense was amazing. The running game, which he's a huge part of, was amazing. And then he also made strides in the passing game. But I think that this year he's begun to take on not only his issues, but the defensive issues. So they started to become porous and give up a lot of points. And he's thinking, well, I got to play like I did last year. I got to win every game. We stopped short of being in the Super Bowl, so that was on me too, which I think he's taken all that on, and it's become, I think, a little bit too much internal pressure that's kind of halted his progress a little bit this year. But he's still putting up fairly decent fantasy numbers, even though they're not winning the games maybe that they would have last year.
Vince?
Yeah, I'd have to echo a lot of that, Shane, because first of all, I think when you look at Lamar Jackson as a quarterback, he's kind of a run first, throw second. And in this league, that's not sustainable. You can't do that. You look at Cam Newton, you look at guys like the quarterback in Washington Redskins years ago. It's just that if you're, RG3. You're running the ball so much that in the shots you take, can you sustain that over a long period of time and for many years as a career? So this league is built around the passing game. I think that in his first year, he caught a lot of teams by surprise because they just didn't recognize his talents, how fast he was. He's one of the fastest guys on the team, and he put up big numbers. He was MVP. So he threw 36 touchdowns, only 6 interceptions. This year, he's not on that same pace. He's maybe 15 touchdowns. He limits his interceptions, but I think he's running the ball a little bit too much. So I think they really need to kind of curtail him in the running game and be more explicit, be more versatile in the passing game for them to move forward. But again, don't drift away from what he does great, and that's his remarkable speed and his remarkable talents to get away from the rush. And that, because as a quarterback, and Eric knows, when you're back in the pocket, the best place to run and the easiest run is for the quarterback. So if you have the speed, you can make a lot of yards. So you're tempted every time to run the football, but you have to put it in perspective. And the biggest plays come through the passing game. So, I mean, they're averaging over 10 yards a pass. They're averaging 5.6 yards a run. So what would you rather do? Get 5 yards or 10 yards? And so, but you got to pick your poison. And I think right now, I think they really need to curtail what they're doing. Like Eric said, their defense is not playing as well as they played last year. So, that means a lot too. So there's more pressure on the quarterback to do even better.
Shane, you had a follow-up?
Not in regards to that. I think you gave great answers. Thank you. I have a question in regards to COVID, if that's all right.
Yeah, go ahead.
So a lot of players took the season off for COVID, and a lot were affected in other ways, like positive tests and things like that. What kind of impact does that have on a player moving forward?
Vince?
Well, I think we, Eric, they gotta continue to examine, what they're doing on and off the field, and I think they have to follow proper protocol. A lot of players have been bitten by the testing side and have found that they have contacted the virus, and either they're asymptomatic or symptomatic. So that's the problem. So you really have to quarantine. You have to kind of sequester yourself. Always, practice the proper protocol. And when it does happen, it hurts teams, because then all of a sudden your 3 quarterbacks are off the list. So now you got to use a backup wide receiver as a quarterback. So that's killing your team. So you have to take a personal responsibility, because it's not just you. It's the people around you, and it's a team game. So you don't want to hurt the team by being sidelined because you're not allowed to play. And so, it's a tough situation. And sometimes you have no control. You think you've practiced everything you've done, and it happens. So that's the crazy thing about it.
Yeah. I would follow that up by saying, I've never contracted COVID. It's only this year that's been around. But I think, looking at someone like Cam Newton, okay, here's somebody who contracted it, and then look how he's played since he's come back, which I don't even know if he's back to what he was before. He didn't look to be. And So if it's me, if I'm a fantasy manager and I've got a guy that has been out with COVID and then comes back, personally, I would wait for him to have at least one good game before I started him in fantasy. Because they like the symptoms of it are, fatigue and fever and, issues with breathing, which really aren't compatible with high performance physically or mentally. So I would wait to see how they're going to do and how they perform before I put them in my fantasy lineup.
That's a good point.
So Shane, that answer your questions?
Yeah, absolutely. I got to say, got 2 fantasy teams that got wrecked by COVID this year. So you guys are no joke.
Sorry about that.
Well, great. Hey, Shane, thanks
Sorry,
for joining us for Ask the Quarterback, and keep playing fantasy, huh?
Thanks so much, Bob. Take care, gentlemen. Nice to meet you.
All right. See you,
Take
Jay.
care.
All right. Remember, if you'd like to ask the quarterback, just email me at brillpro@gmail.com. That's brillpro@gmail.com. You'll see it right there on the bottom of your screen, and we'll bring you on, and you can ask our quarterback the question, and hopefully as you head into these fantasy football playoffs, so we'll make a difference for you. Vince, I want to thank you for joining us on Kramer and Brill, a fantasy football podcast. We'd love to have you come back for our annual Super Bowl show. Would you do that?
Sounds good. Sounds good. Eric,
Right.
you and I can talk some quarterbacking for the Super
I
Bowl.
love it, but you're the only guy that can talk with experience about playing the Super Bowl.
You got better numbers than me, boy. You got a better career.
All right. Thanks, Vince. Take care.
Okay. See you guys. Bye-bye.
All right, so let's go to this week's games. Browns at Titans. Titans keep winning, and it seems like Jarvis Landry's finally getting recognized. So I have to like him and Nick Chubb here. I'm only sold on Mayfield if you have no one better. Titans did not use Jonnu Smith, but Corey Davis and A.J. Brown are solid this week.
I'm sold. I'm more sold on Chubb, I guess, than I am Landry. I think their running game around behind that offensive line is amazing, and Chubb seems to be the guy that doesn't matter what the condition, who they're playing, he's going to, have a good game. Landry, on the other hand, I'm just not sold on the Browns' passing game, and therefore nobody shows up consistently week to week, which is kind of the point of fantasy football, is trying to be able to predict with some certainty, who's going to have a solid game. Because no one's shown up yet like that for the Browns, including Landry, like in comparison to guys like Devontae Adams in Green Bay or McLaurin even in Washington. Whereas Chubb, running behind that offensive line, is bankable. Just like in Tennessee, Henry's bankable, running probably behind any offensive line. But and at this point, I think the same can be said of A.J. Brown. Obviously he followed up a good game and has had several this year and is obviously a big red zone threat for them. And I'd say don't forget about Tannehill also, because against the tough Colts defense, he threw for over 200 yards, 221, I think, and then both a rushing and passing touchdown. And I would expect similar numbers this week from him because they're facing a similar defense, and the Browns defense is in some ways similar to the Colts.
Side note to you that, Henry extended his streak of 8 consecutive road games with 100 yards plus rushing, which, your old teammate Barry Sanders holds the record with 10 straight. So that's going to be kind of interesting to watch this year.
Yeah, I'd like to think Barry's deal had something to do with the guy handing him off the ball.
I would think so.
Yes,
What else can you say? Washington and Pittsburgh. Steelers can't afford to look past Washington, and you'll need to keep an eye on James Conner, who went COVID this week. Since they're supposed to play Wednesday, and this is like the third postponement for week 12, we have little to go on. Now, if everyone is good, then start anyone and pick up Benny Snell if you can, just as the insurance, the handcuff for James Conner. For Washington, Gibson's a go, as is McLaren. But don't be fooled by Peyton Barber's 11 touches. They were well ahead of Dallas with 41 points in garbage time, and he was getting a lot of that.
Yeah, I like what you said here about Washington, how, they seem to be trending up, as fantasy people say, and they've got 2 straight wins, albeit it's been the Bengals and the Cowboys they beat. But I think you're right not to look past them if you're the Steelers. And the defense is really looking like they did to begin the season, which in Washington was very good. And the running game now, as you said, with Gibson, solid. Pitt's defense is awesome, but they've got to show up that way this week. And, now that they're getting deep into the season, they're still undefeated. I think that's going to be what they have so far and will continue to hang their hat on is that defense. And then getting back to James Conner, though, here's another guy that was, struck with COVID. And me personally, I wouldn't play him if I'm owning him as a fantasy manager, simply because I want to see how he does once he gets back out on the field again.
And that's going to be tough this week because this is a playoff week. I know I'm facing that situation. I picked up Wayne Gallman last week, had a great game for me. But Zeke got 3 points. Zeke getting 3 points. That's almost unheard of. It's not something you want to hear.
Right. Well,
Raiders of the Jets, look for all the Raiders to rebound. And yes, I can recommend Carr this week, but nobody for the Jets.
well, okay. So all year long, the Jets seem to be the right tonic for whoever's playing them, right? Only
for sure.
now, I think the defense made the Dolphins work very hard for everything they got in this past game. They sacked Ryan Fitzpatrick 4 times, forced 4 fumbles. And as for the Raiders, they allowed Carr in that game to be sacked 3 times. This is against Atlanta. And then he threw an interception, and the Falcons forced 4 fumbles against the Raiders. So given the current COVID situation too, where when the schedule came out, the Raiders, as I understand it, had scheduled in, they would stay in between the week they played Atlanta and the Jets, both on the East Coast, they would stay out there and then practice during the week. Well, COVID's kind of shifted all that around, so now they had to go back. Then they're going to fly all the way back out again to play the Jets. And so I think for a lot of the reasons we've been talking about, this does not look like a rebound game to me for the Raiders. And I think the Jets, if they're going to win a game, looking at their schedule, they've got all tough games coming up. And this would be the team, I think, if they're going to win one, this could be the week.
I think you're right on with that. I've been kind of watching the Jets, and it's like them and the Cowboys are just like so awful. But there's always a chance these teams are going to win one game. Nobody goes 0 for the season. So at least not very often. Jaguars at Vikings, obviously James Robinson, but I'm not sold on Mike Glennon. I do like Colin Johnson and Keelan Cole, if only for flex plays. Cousins completed 7 passes to each of 4 different guys last week. So take your pick. Justin Jefferson seems to be the go-to end zone guy, though.
Yeah, I agree with you on Robinson for the Jaguars. All year he's been doing great. I too would hold off on Mike Glennon, even though he did go to NC State. But I think Thielen, I would argue, that has had the better year of the receivers there. In that he's got he didn't have a touchdown catch last week, but against Carolina, against Carolina. But in the 2 previous games against Dallas and Chicago, he caught 2 touchdowns each. And he's got 11 for the season. And with Jacksonville on a prolonged skid, I wouldn't count out Dalvin Cook here. I know a lot of fantasy owners, he might have been very high on who you drafted. But I think this is a week he goes off against the Jaguars because defensively, they've been terrible also.
Bengals at Dolphins, Cincinnati playing out the string. I can only suggest T. Higgins here. While Miami is fighting, and I like Parker and Fitzpatrick as the best of the bunch.
I ditto on your assessment of both teams here, and I'll just say that the Dolphins defense is currently playing probably as well as any in the NFL right now. So I think that makes all Bengals players not plays for me anyway.
Colts at Texas, Deshaun Watson on fire right now. That means Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks are definite plays here. I do like Duke Johnson, but only as a flex. He's a receiving back more than anything, and he is getting more rushing time. Hines is a play, although Pittman had an off day. I do expect more against the Texans.
I'm with you on Nyheim Hines. And to me, he's right now the best, maybe the most explosive dual threat running back in the NFL, other than maybe the Chargers' Austin Eckler, now that he's back. And so, yeah, I'm with you. I think the Nyheim Hines and really, I guess, just him offensively for the Colts are the guy you can count on.
Lions at Bears, both your old teams. Stafford, Johnson, and Hawkinson, all solid. David Montgomery had 91 yards. He did not find the end zone. So could this be also, I'm going to throw this out there for you, the return of Mitch Trubisky?
No, you can't. And I agree with you on Stafford and Hawkinson. I mean, look how Rodgers just shredded the Bears defense last week. So that's what they're coming off of as a defense, confidence-wise. If I was going to play a running back for the Lions, though, I think I'd play Adrian Peterson. He last week, when they got down in the red zone, short yardage situations around the goal line, he's the guy they give the ball to. So he scored 2 touchdowns that way. And for the Bears, I also like Montgomery. He's now starting to kind of break off some bigger chunk runs like he had last week. And especially now that the Lions look so vulnerable, having just fired their head coach and general manager. But that doesn't mean I would start Trubisky in any way. He looked to me, I'd almost want to say improvement on a few throws, mainly because his timing and rhythm was sort of on pace and he wasn't holding the ball waiting, but he also tended to throw the ball into double, triple coverages, and that's how he turned the ball over. So that's not a guy I would start right now.
Saints and Falcons, I'm still liking Taysom Hill, although he was a bit disappointing against the quarterback-less Broncos, but he's worth a start if you have no one better, figuring because it was the Broncos, Murray, Kamara, and Thomas are all solid days. But it's hard to judge this one. Falcons, an enigma team, they score 43 points with no standout offensive players, as this was all the defense. Ito Smith, 65 yards was a surprise, but don't be fooled by that. I'd stick with Ridley and Gage, which we told you last week, though, with Julio Jones out.
Yeah, this is a confusing game. And so I guess like you, if I'm a fantasy manager, I'd steer clear of this game with anybody. And keep in mind, though, the Broncos defense has been pretty good all year. And even though they played the entire game without a quarterback, they limited, obviously, what the Saints could do and Taysom Hill through the air anyway. But as we mentioned before, he still had 2 rushing walk-in touchdowns. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. If you're thinking, okay, maybe Taysom Hill didn't come through in the passing game, kind of like Lamar Jackson, who's not coming through in the passing game right now. He's still a huge part of that running game.
Giants and Seahawks, I want to watch the injury wires here with Jones, who went out with a hammy. I still like Gallman here and Ingram, but Colt McCoy is a non-starter for me.
Yeah, and Wilson is a starter. I mean, every game. And DK Metcalf also, 100? He had 177 yards, had 100 by halftime.
Yeah, 27 fantasy points yesterday. Right.
So, and Tyler Lockett has been sort of up and down a little bit, down lately, which makes me think he's going to be coming roaring back as well, possibly this week too.
Rams and Cardinals, well, they always lose to the 49ers 4 in a row. We talked about that earlier. So toss out the last game and look for them to rebound this week. I like Goff and Akins, who broke one for 61 finally, and Kupp. Kyler Murray had a bad day, and it might happen again playing the Rams defense, but he's still worth a start, as are Kirk and Hopkins.
Yeah, the guy I would throw out here as a play to possibly start this week also would be Robert Woods. And so in comparison to Kupp, in the last couple of games, he's had 5 touchdowns to Woods' 2. I guess that's this year. And then Woods he's rushed the ball 20 times, and he's gotten 2 touchdowns that way. So I think that although, I love the Rams rushing attack. I do. But they don't have a guy, they're kind of like the 49ers. They don't have a guy that every week is going to carry the load that you can count on. And so I think that's, to me, a little too unpredictable fantasy-wise. I do like Kyler Murray. I also like Hopkins and Christian Kirk like you do, but I would say I love Murray and his receivers, but against the Rams defense, I'm not so sure about that. They had a dud performance against the Patriots, and to me, this is a better Ram defense than the Patriots. So I think I'd stay away from Murray and the rest of that group.
Patriots and Chargers, not a Patriot I'd start except for the defense, and I'm definitely sold on Austin Eckler here. He came back strong, 11 catches and 14 rushes.
So given, right, the Patriots are a solid defense, but I think I'd add a couple guys to the Chargers list in Keenan Allen, who's had a great year, and his quarterback, Justin Herbert, also had a great year and continues to. And it doesn't really seem to matter any of those 3 guys. As long as they're playing, it doesn't matter the defense. They're all going to have solid games. And I would go with that this week. They're at home against the Patriots. Not that there's going to be anybody in the stands, but the Patriots are the ones that do have to fly across the country to go play the game.
Eagles and Packers, all the Packers, none of the Eagles.
Check.
Broncos and Chiefs, none of the Broncos, all the Chiefs.
Again, this is check that box too, because this is a Chiefs team that isn't just great offensively this year. You put this Chiefs team offensively against any team in history, production-wise, and they're up there. So I don't think the Broncos, as good a game as they had defensively against the Saints, that's not going to happen this week. The Chiefs are at home, and I think they're going to go off offensively also.
And that covers a lot of guys, including Lenny Dawson, and a whole bunch of, Freddie Arbanis. I mean, they had some great teams in the past, but you're right. This team, and, the guy that you have to feel bad for is the cornerback who was covering Tyreek Hill last week.
Well, whoever it was. Right?
Exactly. Cowboys at Ravens, two of the worst hit teams in the NFL, along with the Niners. Zeke got 2.9 fantasy points last week. And the interesting thing was that was 0.9 points more than Derek Carr, who got 2 this week. So anyway, I don't expect a lot more this week, especially if the Ravens get some of their 20 COVIDs back. Amari Cooper, you mentioned earlier, is the only Cowboy I can say start. On the Ravens, I can't think of anyone, but just look to see who's healthy.
Right. Now, this is going back to what we just talked about earlier with Shane on the call-in. I would consider starting Lamar Jackson this week. Look at that defense. They gave up 41 points to Washington. And you also have got, okay, so Lamar hasn't regained his winning form, but like I was telling Shane earlier, he's still putting up fantasy points, and now he's going to take on one of the worst defenses in the NFL. I would consider starting him.
Bills at 49ers. Bills players you can start for sure are Singletary and Josh Allen. The Niners, don't be fooled by their play against the Rams. Deebo Samuels is all I can muster here, and possibly Nick Mullins, who I know you've liked in the past.
Well, Samuels, I would say possibly, but not in Mullins, not this week. And the defense for the Bills is good. And I think offensively for the Bills, the two names I would add in there would be Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley, because they've been productive this year as well. And I'd possibly start Singletary, but in case they run the ball, but he hasn't really been a guy you could count on week to week either. Just depends. Are they going to run the ball this week? If they do, he'll be the guy.
And there you have it. Kramer and Brill, a fantasy football podcast, and now a video cast too. You can hear the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, libsymradio.com, wherever you get your podcasts. And now you can also see the video cast on YouTube by going to my Bob Brill YouTube channel, or by finding the links for all of this at kramerandbrill.com. That's the easiest way. You can see it right there on the bottom of your screen. kramerandbrill.com. And don't forget about Ask the Quarterback. Each week we select a fan who writes in to ask Eric a fantasy football related question. We bring the fan onto the video cast to ask the question directly. You could be that fan by simply emailing us at brillpro@gmail.com. That's brillpro@gmail.com. Heading into the fantasy football playoffs, this last week's going to be a tough one, and hopefully we helped you out. We'll see you next time.